the book of Acts is not complete. The book of Acts will be completed when the gospel commission has reached the whole world, as the book of Matthew 24 verse 14 says, and this gospel...
So we need wisdom in order for us to know how to respond to trials. So the kind of faith that you and I need for the end times is faith that is based on wisdom.
God prepares you step by step by step. Every difficulty, every situation you go through is God preparing you for a greater trial.
So if you borrow from the bank, whose servant are you? Who's your boss? Who's the one who rules? So we have a lot of bosses. The one at work, and the second one, the bank. When the bank says we need you to pay, what do? Even if you don't have money, you will make a plan.
We are in our final part of our series on religious liberty. And this morning, I wanted us to focus on what has in some ways already been touched on, but I want to look at it from a slightly different angle. So we will be looking at illustrations or stories of people who stood up for religious liberty. We've already basically alluded to many of them, but now we're going to draw some particular lessons, spiritual lessons on how you and I, like them, can stand for religious liberty, for our own as well as for the liberty of others. So we'll be looking at Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 3, chapter 6, and we'll end off with the well-known story that we looked at yesterday in Acts chapter 4 and 5. So let's begin by looking at Daniel chapter 1. So you will remember that in verse 5, Daniel is essentially ordered by the king to eat defiling food, and I didn't include it there, but also wine. And we read Daniel's response in verse 8. The Bible says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not do what? He would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, because he purposed in his heart, therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." So what do we learn from this passage? So the first thing is this idea of Daniel purposing in his heart. What does this mean? So the word in the Hebrew means to determine, to resolve, or to make up your mind, right? In other words, Daniel made the decision, he made a firm purpose that he would not defile himself with the king's food. In other words, something that is essential in order for us to stand like Daniel is to make up our minds, right? One of the reasons why we fall into temptation, one of the reasons why we fail in the moment of test is because we haven't yet made up our minds as to whether or not we want to resist or if we want to yield. Are you with me? Okay. I wanted to just highlight this point over here. Like Daniel, when he made that decision, it was an informed decision, right? If you know the background of Daniel, he was raised in a good religious home. He clearly understood the implications or the consequences of eating that food and drinking that wine, right? He knew from the story of Nadab and Abihu that if you drink, bad things can happen, right? There's a good chance that you will turn from God. So his decision to refuse was an informed decision. And so it is with us. Many times you may feel convicted that you ought not to do a particular thing, but because you're not 100% clear in your mind, when you are pressurized, because you're not really certain, if someone is persuasive enough, you'll yield. Are you with me? So it's really important, like going on what we were looking at yesterday, if you are going to refuse a mandate, a vaccine mandate, you need to understand why. Why are you doing that? Why do you not want that thing in your body? Right? Not other people's reasons. What is your particular reason? Right? So we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. But I wanted us to focus on something that I believe is very, very important. What word does the Bible use over here? What is a request? Do you remember when Elder Paul stood up here? He says, I'm not commanding you or demanding. What did he say? I am? I'm pleading with you. What was he trying to say? He's like, I'm not dictating to you, right? I'm humbly presenting a request, in other words, right? So the word request implies that basically respect, right? So in other words, number one, what did he do? He made up his mind based on a firm understanding, a clear understanding of what would happen if he yielded to the demand of the king, right? Secondly, he acted on that decision by going to his supervisor, if you will, and he requested. He didn't demand. He didn't say, excuse me, I have my rights. He didn't say that. He was polite. Did you hear what I said? He was polite. The Bible doesn't teach that firmness is rudeness. Are you with me? Daniel was respectful. And so when you and I refuse to yield to a dictate that is against our conscience, we can still be polite. Jesus, when he refused to do things, he was still polite. And so it should be with us. And people will notice that. You know, one of the things that we read in the Desire of Ages is that Pilate, one of the reasons he knew that Jesus was innocent, do you know how he knew? Because he wasn't like the other prisoners who were fighting and who were defiant. He humbly said, he spoke to Pilate respectfully. So in other words, what will help our case when people are trying to infringe on our rights is the way we treat them. Are we polite and respectful? Now, that doesn't mean you bow down and do whatever they ask, right? There's a balance here. There's a balance that we need to be both firm, but also kind and respectful and acknowledging the position of that particular person. Are you with me? So, yes. So again, his decision to stand for God led him to take necessary steps. He didn't just say, I'm not going to do this, and he just sat there and did nothing. Right? His decision to stand for God led him to take practical steps, right? So what did he do? He informed his boss. He did it respectfully that he would not go against his religious principles, right? So the application for us is that if in our workplaces someone is coming and trying to force something upon us, or rather we hear that the company is going to mandate something, we need to make our stance known. Are you with me? We need to make our stance known, but we ought to do it respectfully. Right? We don't want to go around and try to stir up rebellion and discontent amongst our colleagues. Right? We want to follow the company protocol. We want to be respectful, but we must also be very clear where we stand. Right? Are you with me? Because later on, when you say, I'm not going to do this, they say, hey, but you didn't tell us anything. You're fired. Right? Now, this is not a guarantee that if you do this, that you won't be fired. You could still be, right? But at least what we see is that in the Bible, these are the steps that you and I are to follow. Now, I wanted to just dwell a bit more on, let me tell you a very quick story. I have a friend of mine in Pretoria who, his company actually was saying that the employees needed to receive the vaccine. And he is of the mind that he doesn't want to receive it. And he was terrified that he was going to lose his job, and he didn't know what was going to happen to him. And so they actually wanted to renew his contract, but they had no idea that he was not going to be okay with the mandate or not, right? So what he ended up doing was he wrote them a very clear letter of all his reasons as to why he was not willing to take it. He said he would be willing to make any sacrifice to work for the company, to promote the interests of the company. He would do, and he already had shown himself to be a very good worker. He's a pilot. But he's in his letter, he said, I will work extra days for you, but there are two conditions. Number one, I'm not going to work on the Sabbath. I want, I think he said something like an hour or 2 hours before sundown. And secondly, he said, I politely am going to deny, or I can't remember exactly how he said it, but something along the lines of, I'm going to politely refuse to receive this vaccine. And he thought in his mind that he was going to get grilled by his employer. He thought that his CEO was just going to take him to shreds and then chew him up and spit him out and fire him. But to his surprise, they actually respected his reasons. They respected his reasons, and they actually gave him a really good position. So we often hear horror stories where someone says, I'm not going to do it, and wham, they get fired. And that does happen. I'm not denying that that will happen in some cases. But it's also true that God, in some instances, preserves the employment of that person if it is to his glory. All right, so coming back to this idea of making up our minds, we saw that Daniel, in his stand for religious liberty, he made up his mind that he was not going to defile himself. So I know that you were just learning from the book of James, correct? Brother Babaluki was touching on that very, very interesting book. And I wanted us just to go to the book of James, where he speaks about someone who is basically the opposite of Daniel. Right? Daniel was someone who made up his mind. And in James, James speaks about someone who has not made up their mind. And in verse 8 of chapter 1, he calls him a what kind of man? A double-minded man. And what does he say about the double-minded man? He's unstable in all of his ways, right? Now, if something is unstable, what will usually happen to it? It will fall, right? So this double-minded man, whoever or whatever he is someone who is very vulnerable to fall. Are you with me? All right. So let's just get some context as to what James is speaking about. So in verses 2 to 4, you learned about this not too long ago. James says, "Count it all joy, my brethren, when you fall into diverse what? Temptations." And that could also be translated as tests or trials. Right? So all the way from verse 2 to 4, he's emphasizing trials and really the benefit of trials, right? How they can perfect our character. And then in verse 5, a very well-known verse, he says, "If any of you lack what? Wisdom, what are you to do? You are to ask for it." Now, in the context, why are you asking for wisdom? So that you can overcome the temptation. Are you with me? So, verse 5, you are asking God for wisdom so you know how to respond to the temptation in a way that it will perfect your character. Because remember, verse 3 and 4 says that what do trials do? They develop patience. They make you perfect, right? But they're not going to make you perfect if you fall into them, right? So that's why you need wisdom. Wisdom so that those trials can actually benefit you rather than make you worse, right? So, and he says that God gives that wisdom liberally, meaning he doesn't hold back. However much you need, he will give it to you. Then verse 6 says that we are to ask for wisdom, we are to ask for it in what? It says, "Let him ask in faith, nothing wavering," right? "For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed." Now, let's break that down. What is he saying? He's saying that when you ask for wisdom, you are to ask God with faith. And then he says, nothing wavering. Wavering means to doubt, right? And he gives an illustration of what someone who doubts is like. He's like a wave that moves back and forth, right? Now, just question, if you were standing on let's say a floating board and it didn't sink, you could stand on it, it could hold you up, and there was waves, what would you be? It was like moving you around. Would you be stable or unstable? You'd be unstable. Do you follow? So what he's saying here is that the man who prays, but who doubts when he prays, he is unstable. Unstable in what? In the face of temptation. Are we on the same page? Now, verse 7 then says, let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. What is the anything in the context? Wisdom. So, and what will happen to that man? Why does he need the wisdom? To overcome temptation. So if you pray in the face of temptation and you doubt, what will you not receive? Wisdom. And what will happen to you? You'll fall into temptation. Many times the reason we fall into temptation is because we don't actually believe that God can help us to overcome it. We've already been defeated. Are you with me? How many of you here know Bruce Lee? Shame on you. You shouldn't know him. Don't worry, I know him very well. I was a martial artist before. I love that guy. And you know, one of the things he said, he says, if you've got a man's mind, you've already beat him. Even if he's like 7'5" and you are 4'2". If you have his mind, he's lost. Steve Biko. How many of you here know Steve Biko? Some of you are holding your hands because you're afraid I'll say shame. You don't have to be ashamed of knowing him, right? So Steve Biko was famous for making a remark. He was a very deep man. He was a really, really deep man. I don't agree with everything he believed politically, but nevertheless, he made a very wise statement. Speaking about apartheid, he said, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor, meaning the apartheid government, is the mind of the oppressed. Think about it. Okay, don't stone me for saying this, right? How in proportion, whites versus blacks, like what's the percentage-wise? It's like 90% versus 10%. So how did, let's say 5 to 10% control 90% of the population? Is it because we are stronger than you? Is it because we are more than you? Is it because we're smarter than you? No. It's because the apartheid government got into the mind of the black man and convinced him that he didn't deserve to rule himself and that his fellow black man was his enemy. Because they knew, united, they were finished. They played on the contentions between the various tribes. They actually would go into communities and play on the hatred between the Zulus and the Xhosas and so on and so forth. Why did they do that? Because they knew if they had their minds, they could control them. What does Satan do? The very same thing. Because Satan was the one who inspired them. Right? What does Satan do? He convinces you that that temptation that you have, you can never win. You're done. You're finished. My father did it. My uncle does it. My grandfather did it. Therefore, I'm going to do it. What is that? That's defeatism. It's doubt. What does the Bible say? There is no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful in that He will not allow you to be tempted above that you are able. And we say, that's true, but not for that sin. What has Satan done? He's got a hold of your mind. His most powerful tool is getting you and I to doubt. To doubt God's ability and also the power of the will. Right? Anyway, moving on. Sorry, I get excited when I start talking about righteousness by faith. It's my favorite subject. I'm not even supposed to be talking to you too much about that. Anyway, verse 8. So after verse 6, it says that a man who doubts is unstable and that man won't receive wisdom and therefore will fall in the face of temptation. He then says a double-minded man is what? Unstable. Verse 6, who's the unstable man? It's the man who asks and who doubts. In verse 8, who is unstable? The double-minded man. So what is a double-minded man? It's a man who asks God to help him in trials, but then he doubts that God can actually do it. Are you with me? So, if you and I are going to stand like Daniel, you and I have to believe that God is going to be with us in all of our trials. We have to believe that if God is going to allow us to enter into the scenes of Revelation 13, the final scenes, we have to believe that He is faithful to carry us through it. If the thought in your mind is, I will never go through it, that's doubt. What did I say? It's doubt. Because what you're implying is that it's you and you alone going through the trials. That's what we almost automatically think that. When you listen to Elder Loacha and you hear all that scary stuff about the final events, you think you versus the government. And you forget that you are going to be surrounded by all-powerful angels. You are going to be filled with the omnipotent Holy Spirit. You are going to have incredible power on your side. But what do we do? No, that's too much. I'll fail. Yes, you will if you rely on yourself. But if you make up your mind that no matter what is coming, if God leads me there, He is going to carry me through it. Only one amen. Okay, I'll try better next time. All right, so James, and this is going to sting a little bit. I know you got a sting this morning from the message to Laodicea, but you're going to get another sting. So, yeah, it stung me when I read it. So James actually develops the idea of the double-minded man in chapter 4. He says, draw nigh to God, and He will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, you who? Aha. So there's the double-minded man again. So what, according to this verse, what do we know about the double-minded man that we did not see in chapter 1? I have it in bold. Excellent, right? You should come to Purelight. You got potential. So, yes, so as the brother said, the double-minded man is someone with an impure heart. Right? So we're going to see what that means in a minute, right? Now, I didn't look at this earlier, but the double-minded man, in Greek, it means two-spirited or vacillating, and modern-day English means indecisive. In other words, they have not made up their minds. So the question is, what have they not yet decided on? Right? And this somehow, the fact that they have not yet made up their minds is linked to them having an impure heart. Right? So let's continue. You will remember in verse 7 of chapter 1 that the double-minded man does not receive the things that he prays for. Do you remember that? Now notice verse 3 of chapter 4. It says, you ask and what? Receive not. So can you see that this is speaking about the double-minded man? Same person. Why does he not receive? Because you ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your lusts. So what do we know about the double-minded man? What does it mean that he prays, he's asking so that he can consume it upon his lusts? Okay, the lady in red said selfishness. Huh? Okay, he's praying with the wrong intentions. Anyone else? No, you're tired. Yes. Anyone else? I can't. No. Did you say entertaining iniquity? Okay. So, when it says consume it upon your lusts, basically the thing that he is praying for is sin. He's actually asking that God will give him something that can satisfy his own sinful desires. Are you with me? Like, Lord, please, that woman, I really want that one. Yeah, she's not an Adventist, but she can become one, right? But she's too beautiful to pass by. The Lord, you sent that woman across my path. I know it, right? She came through the door when I was thinking about getting married. It's a sign from heaven. Lord, please give me that gorgeous woman. Why am I praying that prayer? Is my prayer for the glory of God? It's for my own sexual lusts. Right? So the point is that, again, that the double-minded man is someone who believes in God, who prays to God, but he's still centered upon his own selfish, sinful desires. The reason why he's called double-minded is because part of his mind is after God, and the other part of his mind is after sin and self. In other words, he's not yet fully made up his mind. Does he want the world or does he want the Lord? Are you with me? Now, how do you think someone like this is going to stand in the face of temptation? They're finished, right? Again, verse 4 adds some important insights. Now he's speaking of these very same people. You what? Adulterers and adulteresses. That's pretty strong. I told you this is going to sting. Know you not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? So what does enmity with God mean? At variance, or you hate God. Right? So someone who is cherishing sin in their hearts, even though they are praying to the Lord, their actual attitude towards God is what? They believe in Him, but they hate Him. Okay? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the? That's why we know enmity is to be an enemy of God, right? So these people who are trying to have things, God give them things so that they can consume it upon their lusts, these people are called friends with the world, right? So they want to be friends with God, or at least they want to receive the benefits from God, the gifts of God, but at the same time, they want to be friends with the world. And what does that mean? They want the sins of the world, right? 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 and 16. The world is the lusts of the flesh, the lusts of the eyes, and the pride of life. They are still controlled by these things. Now, let me clarify. This is not saying that if you are tempted, like let's say I walk through Nelspruit Mall and I see a pretty lady in a very, 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 very tight skirt. I can tell what she had for breakfast, as my friend says. And I look at her. By nature, I am designed to be attracted to a woman's body. Any man can agree with me here? Right? Anyone? If you're honest, right? We are. That's how we were designed, right? That's how God intended it. So, but obviously, if I look after her and I have sexual desires, then what? I've sinned, right? But when does that thought towards her become sin? It's when I choose to accept that thought, when I dwell on that thought, when I enjoy that thought, when I don't immediately reject that thought out of my mind, then and only then have I sinned. This is not talking about someone who walks in the mall, who has a relationship with the Lord, and who sees a pretty woman and is struggling in his heart with the temptation, but pushes it off. This is talking about someone who enjoys the view. He likes this one, he likes this one, that one looks really good in red, that one that one. Right? Do you understand the difference? Right? So you are not double-minded if you are tempted, you're human. Are you with me? Right? So again, the double-minded man is someone who is trying to serve self or the world and God at the same time. And how does that work out? It never does, right? So again, they have not made up their minds, and this is why they have struggles. Now notice, listen carefully. They have struggles believing that God will help them in standing against temptation. Why? Because they don't really want to overcome it. If you actually went down to the core reason why that person is struggling with that temptation, is because they haven't yet come to the point where they've decided, I don't want this sin. Are you with me? They haven't made up their minds. I'm not talking about you in your own strength being strong and mighty, right? God, of course, if you read the context, it speaks about God giving us more grace. That's verse 6, right? Verse 7 says that we submit to God, and God will pour out His grace, which is His strength, and then in that strength we can resist the devil. But the implication of verse 8 is that even with the power that God can offer you, you still have to choose. He's not going to choose for you. Are you with me? What God does is He respects your decision and He works with your decision. Right? Okay. So this person, this double-minded man, they know that they should resist that temptation, but they haven't really made up their minds that they're going to actually do it. Right? So again, for this reason, because they have not made up their mind, they are unstable. So the reason why many people, when pressure will come upon them for the Sabbath or for bodily integrity, refusing health mandates, medical mandates, is because they have not yet made up their minds. Now, and I didn't really dwell on this much, but the reason their hearts are impure is again because they have not been truly converted. Why? Because they haven't decided to let go of the world, right? Conversion again is a miracle of God. We cannot convert ourselves. We cannot change our hearts, right? But God cannot do it without our permission, right? So the reason their hearts are impure is because they've not yet made up their minds, right? So if you and I are going to stand for religious liberty, number one, what must we be? Decided, right? We have to make up our minds. Number two, we have to believe that God can, and secondly, that He will help us, right? The very first thought that Jesus presents when He's teaching us how to pray is say, Our Father. And how is the Father described within the context of Matthew? As someone who gives good gifts, as someone who takes care of our every need. In other words, the point that Jesus is making is that when you and I come to God, we can have full confidence that He's going to give us exactly what we need, right? We have this attitude that we'll come to Him and He'll give us like something else. And that's why Jesus said, if a son comes to his father for bread, is the father going to give him a stone? What's the answer? No. If you come to God for help against temptation or to be able to stand firm in the face of pressure, to yield your religious rights, the fact of the matter is that God is going to give us exactly what we need. So, and then the other thing is that, as we learned in James 4, we must be willing to part from all that ties us to the world, right? Why do I say that? What is the test that Revelation 13 shows will come to those who do not receive the mark of the beast? It says that they cannot buy or sell. And then when you look at chapter 13 and how it describes the people who will worship the beast, if you look carefully, they're actually divided upon economic lines. It's the rich and the poor, the free and the bond. These are socio-economic things. Satan, in other words, is going to come at us through our pockets. The test is going to be, are you willing to give up your nice Woolworths card? Or do you love Woolworths more than you love the law of God? Are you with me? Do you love your nice Nedbank card, your I don't know the name of these. You got these fancy cards that are shiny. You can see your face in it, and you can walk into the airport and go into first class. All these fancy cards, right? We've all seen these before. And the test is going to come. Do we like that card? Do we like those comforts and conveniences more than we like our? It does have a stronger place in our hearts than the Lord Himself. And if we haven't decided that now, when the time comes, we will choose our bank accounts. Do you see what I'm saying? We have to make a decision. I'm not saying take your ATM cards and cut them up into little pieces and have a little altar and do a sacrifice. I'm not saying that. There's nothing wrong with having these cards, but I think you get the point, right? All right. Now, Daniel chapter 3. You remember, again, in verses 1 to 5, that Nebuchadnezzar, he orders a worship decree that everyone is to go and bow down to his golden image. Verse 6, the penalty is stated, and what is the penalty again? There's going to be a braai, right? In South African terms. So, basically what happened in verses 1 to 6 is that there was a challenge to religious liberty, right? This is what we saw before, just doing a quick review. Then in verse 12, the Hebrews are caught. It was pretty easy to see them because there was like this massive open field and there were all these people like bowing down, and there's these three oaks standing up like looking at each other. It's like, hey, what are those guys doing over there? So they went and they said, oh, these are the three Hebrews. So they went to Nebuchadnezzar and they told him, there are these three Jews that are refusing to accept to obey your command. And you'll remember Nebuchadnezzar, he gives them a second chance. He says, maybe you didn't hear the music properly, maybe you had something in your ear, or maybe you were tired, or let me give you another chance. I'm going to play the music one more time. It'll be nice and loud this time. And at the sound, just bow down, okay? And then he ended off his statement with this challenge. He says, who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? It's like, hey, this guy's bold, right? Nebuchadnezzar's bold. He knew that it wasn't just about them, it was about their God. It was about him versus God, his laws versus God's laws. He clearly understood the issue. And notice that the Hebrews then respond to this challenge to their liberty. How did they respond? I love this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. So again, if you look at the context, they were not rude when they said this, even though when you read this, it's like, woo, yeah, they guys were straight. But actually, if you look at what they were saying, if you look at a newer translation and in the Aramaic, I think, it says what they're actually saying is we don't need to answer that question. What they meant was, King, you already know who can deliver us. You've seen it in chapter 2. Do you understand what I'm saying? You already know Jehovah. You've already seen what he can do. We don't need to explain to you if he is able and who is able to deliver us. Right? Because both Daniel and his friends had actually given instruction to Nebuchadnezzar, if you read Prophets and Kings. Then verse 17. So it says, if it be so, our God whom we serve is what? He is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand. So when he says, if it be so, he just means, if this is your decree, right? If you are not going to change your mind, what do they say? Our God is able, right? You say, who is able? We will tell you who is able. Our God is able. The one who revealed your dream to you, that one, he is able to deliver us from out of your hand, from the burning fiery furnace. Now, question. Wasn't that presumption? How did they know that God was able to deliver them from the fiery furnace? Where did they get such incredible confidence to stand up for their religious liberties? How did they know that God was able to deliver them from the fire? Isaiah 43, in verse 5, you find a promise to gather the scattered children of Israel. And if you know the fuller context, this is referring to God basically bringing back those who had been scattered after the Babylonian captivity. Right? So this chapter is focusing on the fact that God is going to bring back his people from their land of captivity. And what was their land of captivity for the most part? Babylon. So Isaiah 43 is actually written especially to those who would be captive in Babylon. This was like their most encouraging, this chapter was written just for them. Are you with me? It's kind of like for us, as Adventists, it's like Isaiah 53 was written for us. Revelation 3 was written for us. Revelation 14 was written for us. For them in Babylon, Isaiah 43, that was their chapter. Now notice what it says in verses 1 and 2. But now thus saith the Lord, that created thee, O Jacob, that is Israel, he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not. Why? For I have redeemed thee, I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. Now notice verse 2. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers they shall not over. When you walk through the through the what? Just checking you can read. Thou shalt not be, neither shall the kindle upon thee. Who was this written to? The Babylonian captives, those who were captive in Babylon. This promise was actually given directly to the three Hebrews. So when they stood in front of Nebuchadnezzar and they said, our God is able to deliver us, they had a promise to back them up. Their confidence was not based in theory. They knew in the Bible, in the Word of God itself, that God has said, I will do this. Are you with me? So, where did their courage come from? From the Word of God. It didn't come from themselves. It didn't come from their previous experiences of how well they stood and how well they stood trials. Their confidence was basically faith that rested upon the unfailing promises of God. What is it that's going to help God's people stand for God when their religious liberties are challenged at the end of time? It's their knowledge and confidence in the promises in the Bible. Now, if I was to ask you, how many promises have you memorized? What would you say? Now, don't misunderstand me. It's not like you have a seat nearer to Jesus if you've got like 10 more promises memorized. It's not salvation by memorization, right? But let me tell you a brief story. How many of you here know, I can't even remember his name myself. He is a famous Romanian, Richard Wurmbrand. You will know Richard Wurmbrand probably. There's a book called Tortured for Christ. Richard Wurmbrand was a Lutheran, I think he was a Lutheran minister who lived in communist Romania, and I think it was in 1947, 1948, not long after the Soviets took control of their country. He was imprisoned. And the reason he was imprisoned is because he refused to bow to the state. In other words, he was imprisoned for standing for religious liberty. And there is a scene in the book that tells his story that when they had blindfolded him, they had beaten him up, and they had now thrown him in the back of a car, and there were these two secret agents, KGB secret police, on either side of him, and they were driving somewhere. He had no idea where they were driving. It was a long journey. And when he was sitting there, he turned to the guy. Obviously he couldn't see who he was, and he says, "What day is it?" And the man said, "What difference does it make?" Like, that's a stupid question. It doesn't matter for you. You don't even know if you're going to live for the next few days. And the other guy said, let's just tell him, it's the 28th of February. No, the 29th of February. And what is that? That's a leap year, right? Every so often we have years in which there's an extra day added to the month of February, right? We all know this. And he said, when he remembered that, he had memorized what he found out is that there are 366 promises in the Bible that specifically say something about do not be afraid. There were 300 and how many? 66. So even when it's a leap year, you still got a promise for that day. Every day of the year has a promise that says do not be afraid. And the promise for that day was, when I am afraid, then I will trust in the Lord. And those promises carried him through the torture and the suffering that he endured. And it's that very same thing that is going to carry us through the trials that we go through, the promises of God. Are you with me? Remember, we are told in Revelation 14, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. What is faith? It's taking God at His word. God's final generation are going to be a group of people who claim the promises of God. They know their promises, and it's those promises that carry them through the most difficult situations. So I want to challenge you, if you don't know some, go online. You can order a Bible promises book, or you can there's websites. There's literally whole websites with Bible promises. Look those up and start memorizing them. And don't just memorize them, think about them, study them, and so on and so forth. Okay, now this is also, looking at my time. Okay, I'll touch on this. You remember in verse 18, it says, "But if not," that is, if God chooses not to deliver us, we will not serve your gods. What do we learn about this? We learn that their obedience was not based on the confidence that they would not suffer loss. Did you understand that? They were not willing to follow God simply because they thought that nothing would happen to them. Right? In other words, they were willing to obey God even if He allowed them to go through challenges. And that sometimes is where our faith kind of begins to buckle, right? We think that faith, it results in no suffering, no harm, and everything's fine and dandy. But if you read the Bible, you actually are promised that if you live a godly life, you will suffer persecution. There's a promise for you right there, right? But it says that in all of these things, God is able to help us to endure. So verse 28, after they had come out of the fire, Nebuchadnezzar described them as having yielded their bodies. In other words, they gave up their bodies to be killed. They were they offered their bodies, right? They weren't even holding back their literal bodies, right? And Nebuchadnezzar himself says, you did this so that you could serve your God. So part of our service to God is being willing to give our very lives. We don't like to think about that very much, but that's exactly what the Bible talks about. And we have a very well-known verse. Does anyone know what Job 13 verse 15 says? Aha. Though he slay me, in the King James it says, yet I will trust in him. Right? So the point is these men had the faith of Job. They had a faith that would trust God even if it meant loss. For us, many of us, faith is, I'm going to gain something out of this. But for them, they were willing to trust God no matter what He allowed to happen. Because they trusted not only in the power of God, they trusted in the wisdom and the goodness of God. Did you understand that? They trusted not only in His power, they knew He could deliver, they had no doubt, but they also trusted in His goodness. That if He allowed them to die, it was because it was His good will. There was a purpose behind it. Now that's like the next level of faith. Now, I really want you to pay close attention, because when people hear what I've just said, they go, hey, those guys, those are like the Navy SEAL Christians. That's like the A class guys. I'm in what's this? What's that like if you do Purelight maths? You go into that class. What do they call it? Huh? No, it's not maths literacy. Anyways, I was one of those kids. I was really bad at maths, right? Counting the 2,300 days was torture for me, right? Trying to figure out that prophecy for me at first, I was like, hey. So I can't remember what it's called. I think it's like B grade or whatever. You look up to these people in the A class. They're like going to I don't know, China to do maths contests, and you say, those guys can go and do that. I'll be over here do my 1 + 2, right? So oftentimes when we look at these men, we think like that. These are the guys who are going to China to do those math contests. I'll stay over here and be a normal Christian, right? But question, was this like the first test that they faced? It wasn't. What other tests did they face? Daniel chapter 1, they were tested on diet. Daniel chapter 2, there was that test as to whether or not God could answer their prayers. And then they have chapter 3. And if you look carefully, there's chapter 1. The test there is quite intense. And then the test in chapter 2 is like a level up. And then the test in chapter 3, it's another level up. But can you see that God doesn't go from chapter 1 to chapter 3? Someone got it. God, in other words, listen, when I'm testing my students as a Bible teacher, after day 1, I don't say, here's your final, good luck, and I walk off. Why? Because I know they'll fail. And I don't want them to fail. Now, if I, a sinful human being with a selfish heart, can think like that, how much more will God be considerate towards us? We have this idea that God is going to slingshot us into the final crisis before we've gone through anything. It's like going from day 1 to the final exam. That's how we view God. But according to Daniel, that's not how God works. God prepares you step by step by step. Every difficulty, every situation you go through is God preparing you for a greater trial. It's God in His mercy developing you, strengthening you, so that you know, do I really trust in Him? Do I really have confidence in prayer? Do I really believe in the promises of God? Am I really willing to resist? This is what God is allowing us to go through. And I shared this not too long ago. I thought I would share this with you. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, I quoted it earlier on. What the Bible says is that no temptation comes to you, but such is common. Right? In other words, other people have gone through what you are going through at that moment. And then it says, but God is faithful. Why is He faithful? Because He will never allow you to face a temptation that you cannot endure, a temptation that you cannot overcome. So what does that mean? That means that any temptation that comes to you is only coming to you because God knows that you can go through it. Let me give you an illustration. If the devil is over here, I'm Jesus, and let's say there's Brother Paul over there, and the devil wants to go and smash Paul. He wants to throw his temptation at him. Now, what does Jesus do? Satan is there, and he's got his temptation. He's ready to strike, and then Jesus says, hey, hold on. He says, give me that temptation. He takes it from Satan, and then he weighs it. And he looks at Paul. Yeah, you can handle it. There you go. And then he steps back. Oh, no. You're cheating. He's not ready. I haven't yet prepared him. Did you understand that? When temptation comes, we go, God, you're so unfair. I can't handle this. But what does the Bible say? If you're going through a trial, through His strength, you can always endure it. Whether it's a test on temptation with sin, or whether it's a test on religious liberty. Whatever it is, if it comes to you, through the grace of God, you can overcome. Now, I'm just going to summarize this. Daniel chapter 6. Daniel 6, there was another worship decree. How did Daniel respond? It says, when he heard the decree, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day. And what did he do? He prayed and gave thanks before his God. What does it say here? As he did aforetime. What does that mean? It was his custom. Another word for a custom is a habit. Now, question. Did when he heard the decree, was he like, okay, I need to form a prayer life now? What does this imply? Before the trial came, he had already established the habit of praying. And when the trial came, he allowed nothing to stop him from praying. Someone got it. I heard a silent amen over there somewhere. Okay, so here's the point. Those who are going to stand at the end of time are those who allow nothing to interfere with their prayer life. Not their work, not their relationships with other humans, nothing. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that if you're praying and a crisis comes up, you say, I'm praying. I'm not saying that. That's fanatical, right? What I'm saying is if something interferes with your time, you will make sure that you make up for it some other part of the day. Because you never want to lose out on your time in prayer. Right? Are you with me? Why is that important? Because it's at the throne of grace that men get the power to stand against kings. That's where we get the strength from. And that's where we claim those promises that we learned about in chapter 3. And then Acts chapter 4 and 5, again, we remember that the Sanhedrin threatened Peter and John. They're saying, you are not allowed to preach in this man's name whatsoever. Silence. And what did they say? Yeah, we can't do that, sorry. And then they went and they kept on preaching. Right? What did they do? They stood for religious liberty. Acts chapter 5, again, they are rebuked for preaching despite the fact that they were banned. And then in verse 29, again, they say that we will obey God rather than man when man's requirements clash with God's will. Again, you see them standing for religious liberty. Now the question is, how did such a dramatic change take place? And what do I mean? This is the very same Peter who denied Jesus Christ not once, not twice, 3 times with some cursing on top, right? He seriously denied Jesus. Are you with me? He flatly denied Jesus. He said, I am not that person, beep, 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 beep. And he swore and swore and swore and swore. He did all he could to make it look like he was not connected with Jesus Christ. And when the only thing that broke the heart of Jesus in his trial was not how the Sanhedrin was treating him, it was how Peter denied him. So how did Peter go from that to this man who said, we will rather obey? The same people. It's the same people that he was afraid of. Matthew chapter 26, who was he afraid of? The Sanhedrin. And now he's standing in front of the very same people and he says, that's nice, but yeah, we'll go back to our job. What made the difference? You've learned about it. What is the answer? The Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit took a man who was weak and wavering and self-confident and who buckled under the face of pressure to a man who would rather be crucified than deny his Lord. In fact, crucified upside down. And if the Lord can do that with Peter, impulsive Peter, who speaks more than he thinks, he can do it with us. Why do I bring up this story? Has anyone here ever failed in their relationship with the Lord? Like some test came to you and you said, I will never deny the Lord. I will rather go to prison than do that. And then you deny him. And you even swear. Maybe even light up a cigarette. Or maybe you go to the club. Or maybe you work on the Sabbath. Or maybe you watch that movie that you know you shouldn't be watching. You get the picture, right? We've all done that. I've done that. And when we look at that, we are tempted to think, when the future trial comes, I am finished. I'm done. Look at my track record. Finish and klar. I'm done. Are you with me? But what does this story tell us? Even if you have miserably failed, there is always hope. Even if you have flatly denied the Lord and apostatized, but you've come back in sincere repentance, Jesus says, you can make it. I can give you all that you need to stand for me. Now, question. So we know that the boldness was a fruit of the Holy Spirit. We know that the condition in Acts was that they were in what? One accord. Now, question. What was it that helped Peter to put aside all those things that made him weak, all of his differences with his fellow disciples, and to be willing to be united with them, to be in one accord? What was it that helped him to do this? Philippians 2. All right, so verse 1 is saying if. What does that mean? It's a condition. What is the if? If you have been consoled. What is consolation? Comfort. If you have been comforted in Christ, and then the next phrase tells us how. How? By his what? By his love. If you have been comforted by the love of Christ, if you have fellowship of the Spirit and so on, what must you do? Please be of one accord. Do you see the connection here? What is the motivation for being of one accord? The comfort of Christ's love. What was it in the upper room that caused Peter and his fellow disciples and the other 120 to put away their differences and to be willing to be united? It was their love for Christ. It was the fact that they were comforted by his love. Peter in particular was comforted with the thought that he had been accepted once again. Are you with me? What is going to motivate us to open up our hearts, to lay down all of those things, those restrictions that get in the way of God working in us and through us? It's the love of Christ. It's thinking in particular about the love of Jesus for us. It's a very well-known passage. Ellen White says it would be well for us to spend a what? A thoughtful hour every day contemplating the life of Christ, in particular the closing scenes. Now, when she says it would be well, is this her opinion? Yes or no? It's not her opinion, it's God's opinion, right? And if God through his prophet says it would be a good idea for you to do something on a daily basis, do you think it would be a good idea to do it? And what does she say? She says that when we do this, our faith will grow stronger and our love will be deepened. What will we need at the end of time? Faith and love. What will strengthen your chances of standing in the final crisis? Thinking about the love of Christ. Why? Because if you think about what he's done for you, and you understand how sinful you are, and you realize what he gave up that you might have life, that will motivate you to be willing to make any sacrifice. Why? Because my sacrifice is nothing in comparison to what he gave up. I may be risking my life. He risked the universe. He risked his throne. I deserve to die as a sinner. He did not. He was innocent. He was just, but he was slaughtered for my sins. How can I deny someone who has done that for me? And that's why in 2 Corinthians it says, paraphrasing it, that because of what Christ has done, we are compelled by his love. We are pushed, motivated. It's a force, a power that causes us to keep on going even though we are facing suffering. Right? To preach the gospel even though we face imprisonment, even though we face torture, all these things. What is causing us to move forward is the love of Christ for our souls. In other words, friends, the greatest motivator that will push us beyond ourselves, outside of ourselves, to be willing to stand for Christ no matter what, is understanding and thinking about the love of Jesus Christ. I'm sure most of us know that statement, but how many of us actually put it into practice? Now let me clarify something. When Ellen White says a thoughtful hour, she doesn't mean 60 minutes. An hour, you have the hour of God's judgment. Is that 60 minutes? If it was, we'd be done, right? We'd all close the probation a long time ago. Hour just means a period of time. She doesn't mean that you have to study the Desire of Ages or the Gospels. She simply means think about what you know about his life. And where can you do that? Wherever you are. You can do it when you're riding on the taxi. You can do it when you're driving to work. You can do it when you're cooking breakfast. Wherever, whenever, however, as long as his life, his love has your attention. Why? Because it's only as the truth has your attention that it affects your heart. Did you hear that? It's not the fact that you know it, it's the fact that you are thinking about it. That's why we have a Sabbath every week, because the Sabbath forces us to think about the truth. Why? Because God knows that only as you are paying attention to it, is it going to change your life. That's why Ellen White says it's not enough to know his love, we must think about his love. And what does John say? We love him because he first loved us. we will be willing to lose our jobs for Jesus. We will be willing to lose anything to be true to Jesus and to our religious convictions, if our hearts are melted by his love. When was the last time, friends, you thought about the love of your Savior for your soul? There are many people here who basically think down upon themselves. They think that they are not worthy. They think that they are not valuable. They think that they are, because of the way their family treats them, because of the way their schoolmates treat them, because of whatever reason, they think that they are worthless. What is one of the root causes of that? They don't know the price that was paid for them. How can something bought by the priceless Son of God be worthless? Did you hear me? It can't be. No matter what your family says about you, no matter what your past lovers say about, your hair, it's skew. That nose of yours, hey, I don't know how your mother dealt with you when she was pregnant. That nose, right? People, they judge us by the way we look. They judge us by how tall or how short we are, the color of our skin, the lightness of our skin or the darkness of our skin. And because of these things, because we don't look like those models on those fancy magazines, or because we don't have the nice clothes and the nice phones, we think, I'm not as special as that person. I'm not as lovable as that girl because she gets all the attention and I get nothing. Who said that your value is determined by how many guys are interested in you? Even if not a single man thought you were worth it, Jesus thought you were worth it. Did you hear me? And someone who realizes how valuable they are in the sight of Jesus, they will never bow down to an idol or to a decree of man, because they know that they are worth much more than that. They are a child of the King. They are worth the life of the Son of God. And it's time that we start thinking that way, especially ladies. Sorry, I know guys, we have our self-esteem issues, but ladies really struggle with that because the media is hard on you to look a certain way and to act a certain way. But those people are liars. Just don't listen to them. What determines your value, whether you're a man or a woman, black, white, pink, or purple, is the price that Jesus paid for us. So, have we failed Jesus like Peter failed when tests have come? Even if we have, my friends, there is hope that, like Peter, we can be transformed. So let's end off. In Daniel chapter 1, we saw that if you and I are going to stand for Jesus, to stand for our religious convictions, we need to firmly decide that no matter what, we are going to be true to God. Number 2, Daniel chapter 3, you and I must know and be confident in the promises of God, and we must be willing to trust Him even with our very lives. Daniel chapter 6, we must form a habitual prayer life and allow nothing to interfere with that prayer life. And in Acts chapter 4 and 5, we must allow the love of Christ to melt our hearts so that His Spirit can give us all the boldness we need to stand true to Him under the greatest trial. Friends, is this your desire? You want to be like these great men. You want to be firm and decisive. You want to start claiming those promises of God in a prayer life that you will allow nothing to interrupt, nothing to take away that time from you. And do you want to allow the love of Christ to change your heart? If that's your desire, I would ask that you please stand with me as we close in prayer. And I'll ask Elder Paul if you can please pray for us.